Details on a very unusual crime ring, a group of people smuggling succulents. Yeah, plants.
It was an international smuggling ring trafficking not in guns or drugs, but native California succulent plants.
So, Gary, you called me and had the idea of doing this video to talk a little bit about poaching, ethical purchasing choices, and how, as a collector, somebody can try to identify the plant that they're looking at to figure out whether it's seed grown or whether it's potentially a poached plant so that they can make an ethical choice.
Right. I mean, I've had several people send me pictures. Gary, I'm thinking of buying this plant.
Right.
Is this a okay plant to buy? And, you know, I try to give my opinion. But it's became evident to me that there's people, you know, there's a lot of young collectors that are inexperienced that don't know what the criteria is to make a judgment.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I think I want to try to educate people.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can just say from my own experience, one of the things early on I bought, and I'll show it to you guys here, I brought it with me, but the very first Ariocarpus physioratus that I bought it, I was super excited to get it. It was a great price. I bought it online. It was shipped bare root, and once I got it and I unwrapped it and I started looking at it, I kind of started thinking, because I had a couple other Ariocarpus, retusus. You don't see as many poached retusus though. And once I started looking at it, I kind of had some doubts about it being seed grown, and then I showed it to somebody else and they were able to kind of inform me, hey, this is what you look for. With Ariocarpus, it's going to be compact growth, very flat. The epidermis is going to look very weathered and very stressed and sun-beaten. And then the key giveaway for me, because you can still achieve a lot of that by hard growing something. The key giveaway for me is that the tuber was about this fat and there was a clear indentation where that tuber had grown around a rock. And so that was my introduction into, hey, I bought a poached plant. Is that a decision, knowing it now, is that something that I want to continue doing or not? For me personally, it's not. So, and I think, you know, I think that with most collectors, if you're collecting these plants, you obviously have a passion for the natural world and the plants and the organisms that grow in it. So I think if you knew some of the impacts of what that poached plant actually has, you may choose not to support unscrupulous sellers who are either poaching themselves or buying plants from a poacher. You know, so but if they don't know, they don't know.
It all starts with CITES.
Okay.
CITES is a convention on international trade in endangered species. And it all started, I think, with elephant tusks and rhinoceros horns and trying to protect those big guys.
Right.
And now because countries around the world have gotten together, it's international. There's a lot of other plants and animals that are endangered. CITES consists basically of 3 appendices. The first appendix you have to have an export to get the plant out of the country, and you have to have an import permit to get it into the country.
Right.
And that's reserved for the really most endangered species. Appendix 2, you have to have an export permit to get it out of the country. You don't necessarily have to have an import permit.
Okay.
Appendix 3 is a list of plants that countries say, hey, I think, you know, I think this one's about to go. So it's kind of an individual country's concern,
Right.
And they're kind of what I call plants on the waiting list to get approved by all of the countries to be put on 1 or 2.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of the difference. But did you know that all cactus species, all of them, are on either Appendix 1 or Appendix 2?
I did know that, but I have done an incredible amount of research in my time in the hobby. So I think for the average person, probably not. But I also have my CITES permits and I import plants. So I do know that, but that's just because it's something that I've encountered and I've had to find that out through trials and tribulations of of doing what I do.
But for the public's information, all Dideriaceae, Avania, and Acampsaris, all aloes are also on there, except for aloe vera, which, I mean, everybody uses in their hand lotion, right? All euphorbias are on there, except for artificially propagated cultivars, grafts, and they do a lot of that in Thailand, especially the Euphorbia milli, you know, the crown of thorns you see all of the time. When they're transferred in quantities of greater than 100, is okay.
Right.
Some Pachypodiums, Hootias, and Tillandsias, a couple of Dudleys are on the list. Discorias, some Phocarias, Aloysia, Welwitschia is on the list.
Right.
Remember, this is for international trade. It doesn't address, there's many laws specific to individual countries.
Right.
California has laws on Dudleys. Yeah, I mean, more encompassing than just the 2 that appear on the CITES list.
Right.
And you know, don't ever take a plant from a state park. You know,
Right.
Even rocks you cannot supposed to take from a state park. It's okay to buy seed-grown plants or plants propagated from pups or cuttings.
Right.
And a good reference that I found that really kind of summarizes it for our hobby. If you Google CITES, CITES dash Cactus Art Biz, it's a French site, but they have taken the whole CITES regulations and kind of synopsized it for our hobby. And if you have a question, that's probably a good place to start.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay?
I was hiking with a friend of mine up in the Angeles forest, and there's along this particular trail, there's some cactus. There's a few places where cactus had been planted because you have like trichocereus and stuff. Somebody the Forest Service or whoever it was put that stuff there. But it's been there forever. And so now you can find seedlings growing around that area. And so we're walking and he knows that I'm, you know, a cactus guy, and all of a sudden he goes, "Oh my gosh, look at this." And before I can even realize what he's doing, he's dug up a seedling with his hands. And he goes, "Check this out." And I'm like, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I found a cactus. I'm going to take it home." And he had no idea. He was so excited. He thought I was going to be excited for him. And I was like, well, you know, I'm like, you know, the thing that I told him, I said, look, you know, that feeling that you had when you saw it there, you know how excited you got? I go, you just took that from everybody else that's going to walk by here for decades upon decades of hikers that would have walked by and been excited when they saw that. But now it's in your hands, someone who has no idea how to care for it. It's a seedling, and you took it out of this dirt. You're going to take it home, probably put it in some super rich soil and kill it. So that's why you don't do it. That's not to mention that it's also illegal and, you know, all that other good stuff. But just from that aspect alone, I mean, to me, that's really what it, I mean, it being illegal certainly is, I don't want to break the law, but for me, it's even more important to leave it there so that the next generation of people or whoever else is coming down that trail can appreciate it, you know? So that's kind of, for me, one of my personal motivations. Yeah. Because I love going out in the habitat. I've said it, I think, in probably every single video that I've recorded. One of my favorite things ever is to go out in the habitat, and I'll hike for hours going from plant to plant to plant, and just taking pictures, you know, and what the Boy Scouts say is what you take only leave only footprints and take only photos. And that's kind of how I do it. So I want everybody else to see the same things that I get to see, which is why I make the videos and put them out there for the folks that can't actually make it out there. Yeah. You know,
that's why I go to foreign countries and take, usually it's photos, and then I come back and give talks all over Southern California or what I've seen. I mean, I've asked questions, you know, how do you tell if it's a habitat? And the answer I almost always get, oh, it's obvious. Well, it's not obvious to an inexperienced person or somebody new to the hobby.
Right.
You know, it's just, I'm sorry. So what do I look for? Personally, what criteria do I use? Size is important, but it's not the only criteria. Corkiness around the base. I mean, copiapoa is grown in habitat because there's a lot of fog, typically has algae around the base, around that corkiness. Plants grown in habitat typically don't do that unless you go right along probably the coast in California. Then you might get a little algae growing where we have a lot of fog, you know, which mimics the habitat in Chile. But corkiness around the base, scars on the plant. I mean, there's always animals and things taking a bite out of this or that, or something, a bush falling over or something. The patina of the skin usually is a little more grayish or perhaps reddish tinges from stress. Habitat plants typically show more stress than plants that are not under stress growing in somebody's garden.
Right. That's the one thing with copiapoas that I have noticed is the farina on the skin is, if you look at a plant in habitat or from habitat, that farina is there is no green epidermis visible at all ever on those plants. And you'll see them in cultivation where, yeah, there's a nice farina, but you can tell under that, you can still see the green underneath it. So it's not as thick, it's not as solid, and it's not as consistent across the whole plant.
Right.
Is one thing I've noticed a lot.
The size of the caudex or the roots.
Right.
Clumps, large clumps. I mean, I've seen poached clumps of conophytums and lithops that were like 6 inches in diameter.
Right.
You just don't grow them like that,
Right.
you know? If it's a large specimen planted in a small pot, odds are it's not a collected specimen, you know? That guy probably grew it in that pot.
Right.
So why don't we go over and we'll check out some of our plants.
Great, let's do it.
We're going to show you some plants, and we'll see if you think you can identify this. Now, this is a nice old plant. It's Copiapoa humilis tenosissima. It's got a little corkiness around the base, not many Mars. Do you think this is a habitat plant or not?
No, I don't think so.
No, it's not. I mean, one giveaway is the plant's grown into the pot, so I've obviously had it for a long time, right?
Right.
So, yeah, all the spines are nice, even. It's a nice specimen. Let's try another one. What about this old guy? This is ariocarpus fissuratus. I will admit, this is a collected plant. I got it when it was about this tall 20 years ago.
Okay.
And it was predominantly flat. In this pot, and I've had it in this pot for a long time, it's started to grow up, which habitat plants will tend to do because they get more fertilizer and more water. So although this has a lot of green growth and not much, hardly any scarring, the older the growth is clear down at the bottom and you don't really see that.
Right.
This is probably overall, it was a 6-inch plant when I got it. So my 20 years, 25 years, plus another, it's probably close to 100 years old plant.
Right.
You don't find these kind of plants. I got it from a ranch in Texas many years ago. And the guy has an open pit mine, and he would send me ariocarpus before he dynamited the next area of land. And so for a while I had a supply of collected plants, but Texas laws changed and I no longer sell those.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, I have a few from that era. So Hunter, these are your plants, right?
They sure are.
And they don't look anything at all the same.
No, they do not.
So you can see this one is much greener. This one is much grayer. This is a collected plant. This is a seed-grown plant that was here in the United States. So you can see the difference.
Right.
You can probably find seed-grown plants that are at least this size, but not the size of the other one.
Right, correct.
Okay. This is Copiapoa rupestris. It's an old plant. It's got a lot of corking around the base. Other damage, if it was bare root, you could say, gee, it's probably a collected plant. But what kind of gives it away, I got it when it was about this tall, and I got it, it was, I think, a seed-grown plant. But the way I've taken care of it, you can see it's obviously not a field-collected specimen.
Right.
And I've grown it since about this size.
Quite rugged, but not displaying some of the other
I've
characteristics of a field-collected
Right.
copiapoa, for example.
I mean, it's a big mature plant, and I'm looking at the criteria that we kind of outlined.
Right.
It does fit some of those criteria, but I'm trying to show you also what to look at, that it's not a collected plant. Now, the plant that everybody has in question is this old guy. What do you think?
Well, see, I know, but I mean, I could understand why a lot of people would look at this and think, holy cow, look at that giant scenario. That's obviously from the field. I think probably the size, the reason why people have said that is the size and the farina would be the two reasons that people have given me for why they would say that that one is a field collected plant.
And I will say this. I got this plant in about 1980, so it's about 40 years old. It was about this big, and I'm sure it was a seed-grown plant at the time. It is banged up with Mars. I was in the military for 20 years, and I moved it around from Dayton, Ohio to California, to Montgomery, Alabama, back to Albuquerque, and then back out here. And yeah, I'd wrap it up, and yeah, it would get knocked over. It's been knocked over a couple times on my plant bench before I realized it was really a nice specimen.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've tried not to. I've tried to take care of it, and I typically grow my plants hard. Okay, I typically grow my plants hard.
Just real quick, when you say grow plants hard, what does that mean?
The commercial growers water their plants a lot and
Right.
fertilize them a lot so they can grow them up and sell them fast.
Okay.
And the plants are typically plumper and the spines are spaced a little farther apart.
Okay.
For years, I had a job and I only watered on the weekends. So, the plants had to survive until the weekend.
Gotcha.
And so a lot of my plants, and I still only water about once a week. So my plants are grown harder, and so
Right.
they look a little bit more like, I'd say, I pride myself in having plants that look like more natural.
Right.
But you don't see any corkiness down here. You don't see any algae down here at the base. So it's just kind of the giveaway that this plant has been well taken care of.
Right.
And it doesn't show any signs of stress. It's I think most people would agree it's a very well-grown copiapoa.
Yeah.
And I'm now proud of the way it looks.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
So-
It's beautiful.
Okay, here's a, used to be Cactus, now it's Ariocarpus schumannii. It's really corky around the base.
Right.
And so, one could say, gee, that could be a collected plant, but it's also the same size as the pot.
Right.
Obviously, I've had this one for a while. And actually, that one and this one are the same species, one with yellow spines and one with black spines. But this has even less corkiness. It has some on the back side.
Right.
But just being large doesn't make it a collected specimen.
Gotcha.
I've had these both from about 3 inches in diameter
Okay.
for a long time. And we have this one, Cactus horizontaloneus. What do you think about this one?
I would guess that's field collected.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
This is comes from that ranch in Texas that I got the ariocarpus. He'd also send me these guys.
Okay.
And I've had it since it was a couple inches smaller.
Okay.
So these are also very slow growing and becoming collector's items. And so I'll admit that this is field collected, but I look at it as a rescue because the guy were going to be blown up with dynamite if I didn't take them.
So on that particular note, because that certainly is the case where some people do have a plant that, you know, you got somebody who's clearing land for a mine or whatever, where plants are indeed getting rescued, and you've got certain cactus societies around the country that actually do rescue sales.
Right.
But that seems to be every single plant that you can find that's habitat on the internet. Seems like every single seller has that same story. So is that something
that's a common
is kind of
story
common?
that they're rescue plants.
Right. So if I want to know, what's a secondary question that I could ask a seller if they're telling me, yeah, this is a rescue plant and I got it from wherever. I mean, if you really want to make sure, what would you ask? What would be some other questions that you would ask?
What other plants they're selling? How many do they have? I mean, if they're rescue and they're, you know, like in front of a road or something, they're probably going to have quite a few of one species.
Right.
Usually in the United States, the states get involved in that kind of stuff, and they
Right.
will have identification numbers on a lot of the specimens.
Sure.
Foreign countries, maybe not so much. If it's a foreign guy trying to sell a flat of copiapoas and he's from Chile, I wouldn't go for it. I wouldn't go for it. If it was a guy in Chile trying to, and I had a flat of plants and say, here's copiapoa cinerea, I mean, I'm selling them for such and such price, he's hoping probably to make a quick buck. He could be a poacher, but what other people don't realize is he could be the government in Chile setting up a honeypot. They're suspecting a guy over here of collecting plants or stealing and poaching plants, and they think that maybe they can entice him to buy one, and then they got evidence and add that to other things and put him in jail.
Right.
But if you buy a plant from him, they'll hook you too. It's a honeypot. They're looking for anybody kind of interested in that, and you don't want to be extradited and spend time in a Chile jail. You know, their jails aren't as nice as ours.
Right.
So you know, I wouldn't go for that.
Gotcha.
You know, because they attract buyers,
Right.
and so yeah, I'd be really wary of that stuff.
Okay.